Om Shreem Namaha. So that bija mantra is Shreem. And that naturally attracts more, abundance into your life. But like I said, here's the secret sauce for this though, Nick.
So as someone who's been super connected to sound and music my whole life, since I was a little kid, that's what I identified most with. I'm a musician. I still held a lot of skepticism for the idea of sound having a place in medicine and healing. Even though that's something I do, even though I'm interested in sound healing and I facilitate sound sessions for people, I still have skepticism of can you really help someone with their depression with a gong? Can you mantra your way into actually seeing life as a beautiful thing? And this guest is the most extraordinary person I've ever spoken to around the interface between the ancient practices of mantra and sound and these ancient spiritual practices and the scientific validation of that, saying they weren't wrong. These actually work, and science is starting to show us how and why. And there are some really simple practices we can introduce that would allow that sound to come in. Instead of having to use actual medicine, having to do things that are hard on our body, instead of having to do any of that, we can lean towards these ancient practices that many of us have been introduced to before, but didn't even understand the application. So if that's something you're curious about, really understanding a way that sound can change your life, heal you, help you find a better way forward, please check this episode out and enjoy. Hey everyone, I'm here with a renowned neurologist and neuroscientist and a leader in the fields of sound medicine and Ayurveda. She has pioneered integrative medicine approaches, combining conventional treatments with Ayurvedic practices to help patients achieve transformative health results. And as the author of highly acclaimed books, The Prime and Sound Medicine, she's been a regular guest on the Dr. Oz Show and Home and Family, sharing her insights on holistic health and wellness. Please welcome Dr. Kulreet Chaudhary. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Nick. Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be talking about this topic. It's, I told you in the pre-roll that I've never really spoken that much about the fact that the other half of my life, but beyond aviation, is sound facilitation. I love, people ask, what's your favorite instrument? I'm I love the gong now. People expect me to say guitar or piano.
That.
I'm no, it's the gong. The gong's amazing.
I want this to be your coming out party, your sound coming out party then.
It is. And I can't think of a better person to hold the field for me as I do that. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here for that. And I'd love to let's go way back. I'm actually curious, when you were little, what did you dream you'd be when you grew up?
So I'm one of those people that always knew she was going to be a doctor. I don't remember a time where I didn't know that. And it's just such in the Indian tradition, we call it your dharma, your soul's purpose. It's just so clearly what this life was written for. And so although I imagined always being a doctor, I had absolutely no idea that I was going to be this kind of a doctor. And that's always that zigzaggy part of life that makes it interesting and fun. And is evolutionary. So even though I always knew I was going to be a doctor, I had no idea that I would be, really on the precipice of both what is ancient, but also what will be the future modalities of healing.
Yeah. And I'm very curious to reconcile that. So I'm going to put a placeholder on that because it's the world is an interesting place. There's all this modernism, but I'm wait, a lot of that modernism is rooted in the old ways and just repackaging.
Yes.
So let's come back to that in a moment. But first, so how did you get from doctor to working with sound? Where did that enter the fray?
So it was kind of a funny path because when I was really young, I was 9 years old, and my mom had actually developed a thyroid condition and went to her endocrinologist. And he wasn't an integrative endocrinologist. This is way back where nobody was really talking about the relationship between stress and autoimmune conditions. But for some reason, he recommended that she begin transcendental meditation. And so because she started transcendental meditation, which is a form of sound therapy, many people don't realize that these ancient meditation traditions are just a form of sound therapy or sound medicine. Because she started it and had such a massive transformation around her health within 6 months where she was disease-free, didn't have to take any medications. She immediately introduced my sister and I to meditation. So I was 9 years old. I did not realize at 9 that I was practicing the sound medicine. Because I was so young, it became so much a part of who I was that I didn't know that there was another way of being other than being able to connect to the world outside, but also this inner reality that offered so much peace, so much wisdom, so much guidance. And so my story is kind of funny in that because I was a fish in water, with, having sound medicine as such an early part of my development, when I became a physician, I didn't really think of it as a tool. It was just something that I had done my entire life. And so I didn't think about using it as a physician until I started to work with patients with multiple sclerosis as a neurologist. And what I found with that group in particular, because they were so highly motivated, because these are usually young people at the peak of their careers when they get hit with this devastating illness, they were so motivated that they really pushed me to become a better neurologist. And so I had to really start unpacking like everything that was available to them. And that was when I started routinely bringing in the sound component because they demand more of me. And what I saw with that particular patient population really woke me up to the fact that I had been sitting on this gold mine my entire life and took it for granted because it was the same as drinking water for me. And it was such a revolutionary way to approach chronic neurodegenerative diseases.
Wow. So when you talk about bringing sound in, were you actually teaching them mantra as a way of working that?
Yeah. So what I did initially was, I didn't know enough about the variety of sound techniques to feel confident enough to be like a prescriber of the sound. And so what I initially did was I would refer them, to meditation teachers that could give them a mantra meditation practice. But then, as I saw more and more of the changes, and I even did like a mini study in my office where I did one group that did everything in terms of lifestyle recommendations from an Ayurvedic perspective, plus sound medicine, and another group that did just the Ayurvedic recommendations. And the differences were so massive that it was the first time I started to look at sound from a scientific perspective. I was a scientist at the time, and so it bothered me. I mean, I know that sounds weird as somebody who meditated since she was 9, but it bothered me that there was such a massive discrepancy, and I had to understand the biology. So once I started to go into that research of sound and I started to realize, how many different ways there were to bring sound in, then instead of, prescribing it out to other people, I became the physician who was giving patients sound recommendations as part of their entire plan. So, if they needed to be on a medication, fine, there was a prescription for that. But if they needed a sound therapy with it, I also gave them the prescription for that.
Wow. So I'm going to get personal for a second.
Yeah,
a lot of the reasons I haven't shared that I do sound facilitation, because I think a lot of people are like, that's woo, right? It's like a little out there, and like they assume I'm going to wear the big hats and the robes and have all the beads and things like that. And so like I've had this resistance of like, I'm going to be late. I won't be taken seriously in the business community if people think I do that stuff. But I love that, like, part of the reason I think I'm so excited to share it with you on the podcast is because you are the one that can defend the science.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious about that.
And so here's the thing, I've learned, especially because I had to make that leap as a physician when I started going into Ayurvedic medicine. And I really made that leap because I myself became a patient. I had intractable migraine headaches. I'm a neurologist. I could not treat my own migraine headaches. And so I went back to Ayurvedic medicine as a way to cure my own migraines. I had that identity crisis the moment that I had to acknowledge that a tradition outside of my expensive medical education was able to solve something that I was not able to solve for myself as a neurologist. But as soon as I really embraced that, and as soon as I really started to see the science of it, because I was talking about the gut microbiome and the connection to the brain 20 years ago when everybody thought that was woo-woo. And as soon as I started to realize that, first of all, there are studies that support these things, and that I didn't want to be like away from the cutting edge, that part of being on the cutting edge is being willing to look at new paradigms, whether we accept them or not, and really look at, is there a biological basis for this? And so once I made that crossover to really starting to understand how this was working from a biological standpoint and seeing, and this is the difference, Nick, is I was seeing how it was changing people's lives. I had all the courage in the world and I just didn't care anymore. And when you drop caring, then you can just really start experimenting in the fullest way, meaning your mind isn't working against you. You're just going in with empirical evidence and looking at it and going, whoa, okay, this actually is starting to make sense. And we have an entire revolution that is on the way to a whole new type of science. And at least at the end of my life, I can say, hey, I was a part of that, rather than, no, I just kind of I got stuck in my little hole and never really wanted to see what was possible. And that's how I feel now, just with talking about the gut microbiome. It's so old news to me because I've been doing it for 20 years. And so kind of the new news for me is looking at vibrational medicine, how we can use sound and light. And here's the funny thing though, Nick, we use sound in modern medicine. It's not that we don't, we just don't understand why it works. So that also was helpful to be able to say, hey, we use frequency medicine. But when I asked people, how does this work? They didn't really get it. So it's easy when you have some science behind you, because you can talk the talk and expand what we already accept to areas that just have not been studied yet.
So how does it work?
So this was also the advantage of being a neurologist, is that I already had a deep understanding of the brain. And I'm going to give you kind of some simple ways of looking at it, because we can get like really deep into kind of the quantum physics and then we lose everybody.
Yeah.
But just looking, and I love geeking out, but not when I'm the only person in the room, who's like, isn't that exciting? So the brain is this amazing, amazing instrument. And I would even go beyond saying the brain to the mind, because oftentimes people equate the mind to the brain, but the brain is an organ. The mind is something that is way more complex than just the brain. We have an intelligence that exists in every single cell, and there's a communication that is going on from every single cell to the brain. And that communication is really what I would call like the mind. It's so much more than just one organ system. And so this mind of ours responds to frequency. And we now have so much data that shows that the way that this mind works, this mastermind of the body, it's more through a field effect than it is kind of like bumper cars, like one molecule kind of hitting another. And so when I say field effect, I mean, everything is happening everywhere and every single cell is communicating with each other simultaneously. And the funny thing about that is we measure fields. Like, I don't know if you've ever, heard of somebody getting an EKG, which is a field measurement of the heart, or an EEG, which is a field measurement of the brain. So we know that the body creates these fields, but we don't do anything really with them other than diagnose if somebody's got a brain problem or a heart problem. And so understanding that there are actually fields of energy that run the whole show, it becomes easier to understand how sound works, because sound also has a field effect. So now let's just get kind of a little bit more to the nitty-gritty, to the brain, since that's my area of expertise. The brain has this amazing process of being able to entrain in response to certain stimuli. That means it will change the way that it's firing. Now, we can work really hard at changing the way that the brain fires. You can do like 20 plus years of coaching or psychotherapy, or you can just present it with the stimulus that will start to force the brain cells to start communicating in a certain way. So sound has this unique ability of creating brain entrainment, and that means it actually changes the way that the brain is talking. It's like changing the conversation. So whenever I'm working with people who lead businesses and CEOs of companies, when I try to explain this effect to them, I explain it as, what if you had an idea and overnight you could just walk into your company of maybe 1,000 plus employees, and everybody suddenly shared your idea and understood exactly how to implement it with only you having the idea, not having to create a management team to explain it to everybody, but you had the idea, and so suddenly everybody accepted the idea. They thought it was a brilliant idea, and they knew exactly how to implement the idea. That's what happens with brain entrainment. That's how efficient the brain becomes. And sound is one of the known techniques. And when I say known, I mean from thousands and thousands of years ago to create that type of brain entrainment for a particular effect. So much so that the sounds were unbelievably prescriptive for very specific effects, and even down to different body parts. And so it's literally like having a complete pharmacy of vibrations for creating certain effects in your life. Was that helpful, or was it like
that's extraordinary?
Nerdy?
That's extraordinary. Like I'm taking it in because it's, a lot of the training for me in sound was all about entraining to the instruments. It was like really for me, and a little bit of vocal stuff, but it was mostly, hey, this instrument, that instrument. I played the guitar since I was 8 years old. But I never really entrained to it in the way that was like, let me actually quiet myself and listen. What is this thing trying to tell me or show me or teach me? And as soon as I shifted that mindset, a lot more information started to come in. And so there's so much you said, but yes, that totally makes sense of the idea of we exist in fields, but like my buddy actually talks about fields all the time, and I have all this resistance when he says it. I'm like, fields.
Wait, where's the resistance? What? I mean, you get this because you were having a field effect even with the music. So where was the resistance?
That's what I'm saying. Like it's funny. I think it's funny because when someone's like, we're in the field, we exist in the field, it's almost like that gets labeled like that's a woo-woo term. But I'm like, wait, I do heart math, which is like the magnetic field of the heart.
That's like the ultimate.
Yeah, so I'm like, what am I talking about? Like,
is
I believe
the resistance kind of that it, and I'm really curious because I think you're bringing up a great point, but is the resistance that it challenges our individuality, that like we want to be kind of an isolated person, or like does it get kind of scary about the vulnerability of our connection to each other and honestly the whole planet? Because if we are fields moving around, that completely changes the criteria for living a healthy life here on the planet, right? Because your health, in a sense, becomes the health of everybody else and the health of the planet. So is the resistance kind of like it forces a new paradigm of how you have to walk on the planet?
That's a great question, actually. And I'm going to breathe into that for a second and see what is the resistance. And I think you might be right. So I'm going to go a little off the course here. 2 weeks ago, I spent a week studying Pure Land Buddhism, which I didn't even know what that was. I had no idea that there was anything called Pure Land Buddhism. And a lot of it was oddly enough about mantra and about fields of energy. And I was like, what is this? Like, first of all, I don't understand the importance of mantra. I never really connected to it. I grew up Catholic, and so we would sing songs and do these hymns and prayers.
Yeah.
But I never really saw what that was doing. And then the idea that like, wait, are we just like a really big energy field that is kind of collapsing down into what seems like the illusion of the physical form? And then most people in my life are like, I'm out. Like, I have no idea what any of that means. I'm exiting the discussion. And I think that's part of the fear, is that I'm so afraid of not only losing other people, but that inner skeptic in me is like, this is too weird and I want to be relatable.
It's so interesting you saying that, though, because what if you're relatable, but just to a different crowd, number one? And what's funny to me sometimes is how we think our truth is the weird part. Like, because when I say truth, if we sit and really talk about it, there is not one business person that I have met. I work with a lot of people in business. That's why I'm referring to these analogies that I have not met that understands what intuition means, that understands how to read a room. And it's like, so what are you reading then? Like if we're uncomfortable talking about the fact that we're at least more than what the body is, if we're uncomfortable about talking about that, how do you make sense of your own success? Of like, oh, I had an intuition about that. And the reality is, as we start to just kind of to embrace that, because I think people also think like, oh, I'm not going to be unrelatable. Your degree of being able to connect to other people makes you even more relatable, right? Because when you start to realize that you are having a field effect, well, why would you not utilize that? Why wouldn't you just go, hold on, if I'm having a field effect, let me think of the kind of field effect I really want to have. And then all of a sudden, there's this new discussion around connectional intelligence, right? It's beyond emotional intelligence. It's your ability to be able to connect. How are you connecting? You're basically understanding the science of the field effect and using it intelligently rather than haphazardly. And every single person that I have ever met that comes to me to work with me that is already successful in a particular area of life, they already understand this, but they have never acknowledged it as a broader way to be able to direct their life and their relationships in the way that they want. They will oftentimes do it for their business, but they don't realize that they can do it in their family. And I think this is also where we start to create just better business practices, better practices at home, because you start to realize that when you're harming anybody else, you're just ultimately harming yourself. Like there's no escape from it. You can't do something in the world without it coming back at you.
It's probably that. I mean, literally this morning I was meditating on this. It's like, why do I have, I talk about the most woo stuff on the planet. Why do I have resistance to a friend saying the word field? And you might be right. I think it may be, first of all, it's a cognitive dissonance with any time I've ever felt alone is so false, right? It's like, that is so not even possible.
Yes,
really
it's a cognitive dissonance, but that doesn't mean that it's not a true emotion, right? Because cognitively you can know that, but it's still an emotion. And here's how I would approach it is part of understanding that you are a field is starting to merge the different parts of you that feel, and I'm sorry, Nick, I'm not saying you as just Nick, but
you can know, it's a lot.
The parts of us that are fragmented. And this is the one thing that I see again and again and again as I work with people is that, you know, part of the development of the ego, especially in the West, where we're really fragmented, like even if you go to a physician, it's like, well, what's the specialty? And then there's even subspecialties. And like we have so many fragments with the way we create even companies. There's such hierarchy and then there's all these divisions. And so part of the way that we have developed as a society, which is not true for every society on the planet, is we've created these buckets of who we are, these fragments. Like maybe the mind is there, maybe emotions are over there, maybe the body is here. And then maybe this part of us that actually knows that we're all one, we put that over there and we don't even know what to call it because, you know, heaven forbid we call it like spirit or anything else, because then we're really like kind of off our rocker. But part of understanding ourselves as a field is these different parts actually finally starting to come back together and us being comfortable with the fact that we're so much more than our parts. And that's just part of our journey. So I don't think there's anything wrong with your dissidence. I think that's part of each one of us, you know, going through a similar journey of coming back to a whole from being fragmented. And as we do that, and that's what I found, you know, for my own journey is as I did that, I had no opposition to my training in medicine and my training in Ayurvedic medicine and my training in, you know, and my research in sound. Nothing was contradictory. I could see it as a whole because I was able to see myself as a whole. And so I think you're just in a place where you're discovering your wholeness and there's really nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds...
Am I like psychoanalyzing you?
No, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. We're here to throw it out into the world because I think that I'm not that unique in that way. And that's partly where, you know, this, especially coming from New York, now I'm in Boulder, but being in New York, there's so much disintegration, right? There's so much of this like feeling separate, feeling isolated, being close to people, but not actually feeling connected to them.
It's because of the way that the buildings and stuff are the way that the society is built there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And even this idea of like, I think people are in survival. So it's all about me.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And obviously the West is very individualistic, which is something I'm also learning a lot about for myself. But it's interesting. It's like the fact that we're talking today, I'm like, is this all based on a field? Is this based on the fact that over the last couple of days and the last few weeks, I've been faced with two concepts that are relatively, I've never really excavated before. And here you are talking about two of them, both of them, right? Mantra and fields. And yeah, I'm so curious. Like I understand the concept of the field. And again, for a lot of people, I think they see themselves as just like their physical being and their form, which is a whole other thing. As I've been feeling into like, I am the energy of my intention. Like I do notice that when my intention is this way, I seem to get more of that. When my intention is another way.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I get when I'm looking for the negative, a lot of negative things happen.
Yes.
And like, I'm curious to know, Mantra is a big question mark for me. And another thing I've had a lot of resistance for because it felt culty, right? Like growing up in the Catholic Church.
Sure. No,
right? It's like, say this thing. It's not, don't say what you want to express. Instead, express what someone else is telling you to express.
Okay. So I love that you're asking these questions. This is so great. This is really so great. So first of all, I want to say that you sound like the majority of the people I work with in business. So you're definitely not alone. And what's amazing to me is they are oftentimes my best and favorite patients because they bring their focus that they have in other areas of life to this, and they go so deeply into this. So you said something really beautiful. I oftentimes notice that if my brain focuses here, like, wow, I get more of that. Or if my brain focuses here, I get more of that. The challenge of the brain, and this is all of our brains, is that it's focusing on a whole lot of stuff. It is so difficult to control the brain. Not impossible. You know, there are people who leave society and accomplish that over the course of several decades. It is just really, really, really difficult. So instead of trying to control the brain, you use sound that has a specific resonance for what you want, and you just entrain the brain. Okay. And so what that means is that more and more of the time, because your brain is getting used to literally firing at a certain frequency. And when I say that, I'm talking about like when we look at EEGs, you have specific brainwave results that it's literally firing at that frequency. It gets used to being at that frequency. So it starts to look for things that are more and more at that frequency, right? And so the whole purpose of the mantra, and I hear what you're saying, here's just this phrase. It's not necessarily what I intended. Okay, but what if it's not even an intention in a sense that that's just pure sound? You know, a lot of these longer mantras, they can be shortened into just one teeny tiny unisyllabic bija mantra. It's just a tiny little sound. It's literally just a sound bite that in and of itself has no meaning, but it leads the brain to a certain outcome that you have decided that you want. And that's what I mean. I was so surprised when I was looking at the research in sound medicine of how prescriptive it was. You know, like, for example, some people were like, I just simply want more wealth and abundance. Like, I want more money. Well, there's a sound for that. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, for other people, it was like, look, I just want more connection. You know, I just want to have more harmony in the family, right? Well, there was a frequency for that. And for other people, they simply may have wanted like more inner peace. That's it. That's my only focus. More inner peace. There's a frequency for that. And so when people will ask me like, what's the best frequency? I said, the funny thing is, even though they all start out with a specific, you know, starting place, they have the same finish line, right? Because what happens when you have all the abundance, or when you have that feeling of I have enough? What's the first thing you start to do? How can I give this to more people? What happens when you have that harmony inside of your family? You start to realize, oh my gosh, actually the world is my family. What happens when you have that inner peace? You immediately go, oh, I want other people to have the inner peace. All of these different start points, they end at the same realization that we are all ultimately connected. And because of that, there becomes a natural altruistic desire to do things for other people.
Beautiful conclusion there, especially like this idea of like, I think the Beatles had it right? Which is like, you know, it's all love, we're all one and all that stuff. But I have to ask, because if I don't, I'll probably get negative mail. What's the sound for more money?
The sound for more money?
Yeah.
Okay, so the absolute shortest mantra for that is just Om Shreem Namaha. So it's OM, and then the next word, the sound, the bija mantra is Shreem, SHREEM, and then the word Namaha. It's just a way that the sound kind of comes to an end. Om Shreem Namaha. So that bija mantra is Shreem. And that naturally attracts more, you know, abundance into your life. But like I said, here's the secret sauce for this though, Nick, is you can start doing that mantra and realize you already have enough. You understand? Like when we talk about abundance, so often, we were talking about this beforehand, I will work with people that have so much wealth, they will never spend it. In 12 generations, they will never spend it. They have nightmares regularly that they're poor. So they have all of this money, but they have a poverty mindset. They are never comfortable with how much they have. And so it's not just about getting more. It's about realizing you already have everything that you will ever need.
Yes. I mean, I 100% agree with that. I know it's like, you can be around private jets. We see that it's the external conditions will never necessarily create that space inside unless we allow it in or allow things to entrain us or do, I guess, these kinds of practices. I'm so curious. So someone wants to do this, right? Someone says, cool, I want to do mantra, the Om Shreem Namaha. Is that what it was?
Yep.
So someone says, I want to do this. Like, I really like the idea of calling that in. Is it something where someone is just saying, I wake up in the morning and I say that for 20 minutes straight? Like, how does that work?
That's really as simple. And what I tell my patients is, start with maybe 5 minutes, because what you'll notice is whenever you start any type of a mantra practice is everything that is not that vibration starts to move out. And so give yourself an opportunity to allow for the shifts to happen. So start with 5 minutes and then go up to 10, then go up to 15, then go up to 20. And for most people, 20 minutes a day is a really, really sufficient starting point. Now, sometimes you end up wanting to do more. And for this particular mantra, that's perfectly fine. Let me explain what I mean by the things that are not in alignment with that mantra start to move out. So you might start doing that mantra and maybe you're in a relationship where it really is not like the resonance of abundance, meaning you always feel hungry. You never feel like your needs are actually met, right? That's a state of poverty. That's a state of relationship poverty, right? And so you may start to do this and that relationship may no longer be a part of your experience, right? Because it is in contrast to this new frequency that you are adding into your life. Now, it could also be that maybe you're in a relationship, but there is some friction. Well, all of a sudden, you may start finding new ways of communicating in that relationship because now all of a sudden you are bringing in this frequency of greater abundance. It's not just physical abundance. It's just greater abundance. You have more of, the spice of life, the things that bring in that feeling of satisfaction. So does that make sense why I tell people to slowly do it? And you can also start first just doing it out loud. And then eventually you'll get comfortable enough with the sound that you can just close your eyes and do it silently. And when you start to hear that frequency through your day, that is when you really know you have hit that brain entrainment, because it means even when you're in the midst of a negative experience during the day, your brain is still firing with that specific frequency.
Yeah, I mean, again, like the place that this really resonates, and that is, I guess it's an intentional pun, is I can really see this idea of, I grew up on instruments, like I said, and it's like if a guitar's out of tune, I have to retune it and get it to the space where it's right. And if I play a guitar that's in tune and there's one nearby that's also in tune, that same note will resonate.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So it sounds like it's literally tuning up my own energetic field, my own experience, so that instead of resonating with the dark things, which again, I think for New York is a lot of scarcity. No matter how much you have, there's always someone with more, bigger, better. And I was like, well, I think I was tuned to that. And then I came out to Boulder very quickly, like tuned to the mountains, tuned to the groundedness, right? Tuned to a completely different energy. It was like, if you think you understand what decay is, you don't. Stand around a mountain for a while. It'll show you like, calm down. It's all good.
Exactly. And you said something so beautiful, Nick. Do you mind if I just point this out?
Yeah, please.
You're tuning into, you said the mountains. Do you know where all of these ancient frequencies, where they come from? They're all sounds of nature.
Interesting.
They're not created by any human being. They're all sounds of nature that were perceived in these really deep states of meditation, but they came from the mountains. They came, from the trees. They came from the ocean, meaning they're the vibratory code from which nature sprang, and there's so many creation stories around the planet where it talks about how life came from sound. Like first there was the word, and it's a very common description of how life was created, that there was sound first, and then from sound it led to somewhere else. And so when we're tuning in, as you said, to the mountains, you're really tuning in to the vibratory code of these ancient mantras.
Wow, that's really neat. And it's like the thing I tell everyone when I go to do sound facilitation, I think I have such a strong inner skeptic that I can speak to the skeptics and they trust me because they're like, this guy also gets it. He's like kind of half in, half out. But I would tell everyone, like, if we just go from the very fundamental, I think we all agree that whether it's atomic or quantum, everything's vibrating. If everything's vibrating, everything's making a sound. If everything's making a sound, then the entire universe is a song. And what blows everyone's mind is when I say, though it's not the etymology, maybe there's a clue in the fact that it's universe. It's one song.
I love that.
Right? It's so extraordinary.
Yes.
So I've really sat with that. Like, is this whole world just frozen music?
It is. And, can I help you kind of take that further into the biology part? We can ground this out. There's actually researchers at UCLA that are looking at the sounds produced by specific groups of cells. So groups of cells are tissues, and we identify those tissue as like our liver or our spleen or brain. And what they're finding is that there's a very specific frequency or song, if you're a musician, produced by every single organ in our body. And the frequency is different in a healthy organ versus a diseased organ. And so one of the things that they're exploring now, which is of course what, all of the ancient texts talk about, is exactly what you said, using sound as a tuning fork to bring the organ back to its original frequency of a healthy state instead of having to use medications. So we're really on the brink of this. Like our technology has advanced enough where we can use these extremely, extremely fine microphones for being able to pick up the way that the body is singing its song, essentially, and then how we can actually tune those cells back to their natural set place. But that's essentially what we're doing when we're using these ancient mantras. Instead of doing it like organ system, as I said, we love fragmenting things. So instead of doing it as just like organ system by organ system by organ system, they used sound that were globally healthy for the entire body and the mind. So is that helpful to kind of ground it out that we actually do know that we're making?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that, so I play all these different instruments. The one I've not gone down the road of is the tuning forks. I was like, that just is too out there for me. But I think what you just said is like, all right, I'm ready to try the tuning forks.
I love
because
it.
I get it. I know people that have done a lot with it. Where do you recommend? So for someone who's curious to know, like, what are these frequencies? What are these mantras? What are these sounds? How do I start to explore that world if I'm starting to open my mind to it?
Well, I wrote my book, Sound Medicine, to help people bridge the science of this with the ancient practices. And I talk about a lot of the, ancient sound techniques in the Vedic tradition. That does not mean that that's the only tradition. It's just you can't study the entire world at once. And so I think that book is a great place to start to understand the science of it. And then you can really decide kind of which tradition do you resonate with. Like, for example, the Gregorian chants, they're very much based on the same science. People are oftentimes surprised that within their own traditions, they can find these lineages of sound medicine. And I had mentioned to you before that there's one sound prescription that I give to pretty much every single patient, and it's called the chakra mantra. The reason that it's called the chakra mantra is it's the resonant frequencies of all of the major energy centers in the body. The reason it wasn't hard for me to understand chakras, which are just energy centers, is all of those energy centers resided at the exact same place where all of the major nerve bundles resided. And so for me as a neurologist, I was like, well, it makes sense that there would be an organization even beyond just the physical coming together of those nerve bundles. So that, I think, is a great way to start, the book for understanding more of the theory and the science behind it, and then the chakra mantra practice to be able to actually implement something in on daily basis. Or you could just do the mantra I gave you for wealth, Om Shreem Namaha. I told you all of it ends in the same place. All of it ends with an understanding that we're connected and basically wanting to help other human beings.
What's your personal favorite? What's the one that you enjoy the most?
I do the chakra mantra every single day because it just gives me so much vitality. I mean, I feel so charged after that. And for me, it's like the same as like taking a bath for my mind. I just can't imagine starting the day feeling grimy from yesterday's like negativity. So that's my like absolute favorite. And then I tend to choose different ones for kind of like what my goals are for life. So right now I'm starting to do some of the sounds that are anti-aging, because I plan on being healthy and active for the rest of my life. And so, at 50, I'm really starting to look at like, what do I want to invest? So that's become like part of my daily sound practice is the chakra mantra, then specific ones for just bringing back more nourishment and vitality to the body. So I don't have to be so dependent on my food quality. I've got these other sources for being able to revitalize my body.
And a personal question. So I have a clarity that came in yesterday that I believe my solar plexus is blocked.
It's a common place. Oh, so it's interesting, Nick. Do you mind if I get a little personal with that?
Let's do it.
All right. So the solar plexus is also the seat of the mind. So you were saying how you were having kind of this mental block. And so the solar plexus and mental blocks oftentimes come together. The solar plexus is a common place that I work on with entrepreneurs in particular, because you have to have certain fixed beliefs to get to a certain place, but then you have to have those beliefs kind of broken to go beyond where you've gotten to. And so the mind and the solar plexus, and this is, of course, why the gut and the brain are so significant, but the mind and the solar plexus are one functional unit. I would actually really recommend the chakra mantra for helping to open that up, because it builds the energy in the energy centers below it, and it moves the energy to the energy levels above it. And so this tug of war that you're having of like going, okay, I know this, but I kind of don't want to know it. That is the tug of war when the energy is trying to move up from the solar plexus into the heart. And the heart is the seat of wisdom. It's no longer knowledge that you learn from books, knowledge that you learn from podcasts. It's wisdom where you just know because it is your experience of that truth. So that's the jump you're in the midst of making.
Wow, that's extraordinary. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I, as we come to land this thing, I'm really curious, what is your dream beyond? You've already achieved so much and you have such a wealth of knowledge. What do you dream about now?
Reducing the suffering of other people. I think it's been kind of a common dream throughout, but as I mentioned, as my cup feels more and more full, there's just a natural desire to give that to more people. And so in this next phase of my life, what I'm seeing is I'm starting to work with more and more like leaders of companies, or leaders like in the entertainment business, or athletes that have the ability to really influence and change the lives of millions of people. I don't know if it's so much the dream that I was dreaming as much as it's a dream that's being presented to me as a way of being able to expand that intention of just reducing the suffering through people who have already the connection to so many. And so that's really where I'm at now. And it's a very fulfilling place to help somebody expand their consciousness, who then in turn has the capacity to reduce the suffering of so many people.
Extraordinary. Well, thank you for doing that. Truly, I think it's like the highest aspiration of mine. Once I understood the concept of like a bodhicitta vow, this idea of like really doing everything for the benefit of all living beings. It's beautiful to hear someone who's really living it and really doing it, and seems to have moved a lot of the blocks to that. So extraordinary. It's great to be a witness to that.
I don't know if I've earned that compliment, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, you're doing the work. That's all I can say, right? Like you really are doing the work. And I mean, just to recap this, it went in a direction I did not expect it to go. I thought we were really going to talk about gongs and mantras, but really got into the field and the concept of like, so much of my life lately has been realizing I am limited by my own ability to believe that things can be good, to believe that things can work out, right? And I think so much of that was saying...
That's the solar plexus blog. That's the solar plexus blog, yes.
It's so cool to hear that, like, all of my upbringing, it's kind of like what you said, I grew up playing music. Like, I was given the tools to actually affect myself and to heal myself and to heal others and to hopefully find my way to that level of abundance where I can show up in that same way. And for anyone listening, I hope that's the same thing you take away, is you're not that far from being in a space where you feel that you have enough so you could help others feel the same.
Beautiful.
And I just think that's really what this comes back to. And that's why I love music so much, because it is that universal language. It's that way we truly feel connected to others, no matter what language people speak, no matter what their background is. We come together, we play music together, and it's like, oh yeah, we're all part of something together. So thank you for the reminder of that. And if anyone is I have so much follow-up I'm going to do based on this conversation. But yeah, again, if you're really interested in this kind of stuff, definitely, check out the website. I'll put the website in the show notes. You can check out you said the chakra meditation, the chakra mantra meditation's on your website for download?
Yeah, it's just a download. It's really simple practice.
Fantastic. So check that out if you're curious about it. And again, you can check out our books anywhere. The books, again, are The Prime and Sound Medicine, which I'm going to be checking out Sound Medicine tonight. It's going to be awesome to get to pick through that piece. And beyond that, again, if you're inspired by any of this, just be part of the conversation. I think this is really cool to be at this time where all this cutting edge stuff seems to just be validating what always was, right? There used to be this real disparity between those two worlds of medicine and spiritual practice. And now it's like, actually, we're just using medicine and science in many ways to validate what the spiritual practices always were. So
exactly.
I think it's really extraordinary. And again, thank you so much for being here.
It was my pleasure, Nick. I really enjoyed this. And thank you for being so vulnerable and letting me kind of dive in. I really, really appreciate that.
My pleasure. I hope you all enjoyed watching me get a little bit abused on a podcast. So
lovingly abused, I hope.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you, everybody.